As the great philosopher Taylor Swift once said, the rumors are terrible and cruel, but honey, most of them are true. Darryl Sutter is supposedly sabotaging, quote unquote, this team so he can return as general manager. Will ownership listen to the man and give in to what he wants, or are they going to stick with what they know since they know Darryl Sutter as general manager does not work?
You're Locked On Flames, your daily podcast on the Calgary Flames. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Locked On Flames. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline, where the game starts. And I'm your host, Jess Belmosto of Locked On Flames and the PHF Players Association. And thank you so much for tuning into today's episode, where we are going through some really awkward times here in the Sea of Red. And we're going to have to talk about some Darryl Sutter quotes, and he had plenty to say last night against the Colorado Avalanche and that god-awful loss. And how will ownership handle the rift between coach and general manager heading into, Brad Treliving's contract year? And we have a lot to talk about today, so let's not waste any more time. Make sure you hit subscribe wherever you're listening to so you never miss an episode of Locked On Flames. Last night, he had a very interesting quote, and he says, I think I've got a pretty good idea of where our team's at. We're in the middle of the pack, and we're not in their class. It's a big difference. Yes. I think that's always been very obvious, but what is horrifying is that Avs lineup last night didn't have Gabe Landeskog and did not have Cale Makar. You lost 4-1 with a Cale Makar-less Colorado Avalanche, 4-1. You got one goal by Alexander Georgiev, who was essentially just a backup goalie in Colorado now, the same way, even more so than he was when he was in New York. And it is so frustrating to watch this team go out there and fall flat on their face night after night. There is no sense of urgency. They're all okay with playing that crappy, fine hockey, coasting through the season because they know none of their jobs are at stake. Darryl Sutter has made it very clear that he's in no rush to put Jakob Pellitier in the lineup or Matthew Phillips. I found a quote from Sutter from earlier this week that I'm going to talk about a little bit later, and just what a disaster, truly. Like, you wonder why they're in a different class. Number one, they were in a different class when you had two of the top best US-born players in the league on your team. They were out of this world, and they're so much faster than the Flames. Most teams are. And you look at what Sutter did when he came in to this organization, or returned to the organization back in 2021, and he had them back in shape. He had them doing bag skates. And I feel like we're back at that point where there is no urgency. There is no desire to win regular season games. There is no desire to make a true push for the playoffs because you know that your job is safe. It's like when you work, a minimum wage job, and you're putting yourself through college and you call out because, you're hungover. Okay, these players are playing like they're hungover, and like they know that it's fine because Darryl Sutter is not going to say, okay, Huberdeau, or okay, Lucic, you're out. Trevor Lewis, you're out. Pellitier and Walker Dewar, you're in, or Matthew Phillips and whoever is in, because there's none of that. There is an overwhelming sense of job security, and listen, I'm all for job security, but right now we're talking about winning, and this is different than the regular workplace. But it, it is so frustrating. And there is a quote in this article from the hockey writers. I want to make sure it is written by Colton Pan Panku Panku, and he says, uh, there are many reasons the Flames are struggling. One is that Jonathan Huberdeau, who has just 8 goals and 31 points through 41 games, hasn't fit in the way many hoped he would. And I'm going to stop him right there. I'm just going to stop him. This is not a reflection of his writing, because it's true. It is very true. But you know why he hasn't fit in? Because Darryl Sutter has put dead weight on the other wing. You cannot have a successful, cohesive line. Darryl Sutter should know that Nazem Kadri and Jonathan Huberdeau cannot carry a player up to their standard by playing them together. That's not how this works. You can kind of like elevate a player and be like, okay, like there's pressure to play as a second line winger, but not when this dude is like 34 years old, has won a Stanley Cup. He doesn't care. He is there. He's been doing cardio minutes all season long. There was no need for it, okay? And yeah, you wonder why Huberdeau only has 8 goals. Number one, he's always been an assist guy. Number two, he's coming off the biggest year of his career, and the expectations are high. Flames fans have high expectations, but he's also not being set up for success. He's not. His coach is sabotaging that line. I'm not saying you have to go out there and, scratch Luch and put Pellitier on that line. You could make something else work. Shuffle things up. You put the lines in the blender last night. Do it again. Ask the Magic 8 Ball. Call Jeff Ward, because y'all have very similar styles of playing, or coaching rather, and figure it out. And the next sentence goes on to say, the same can be said for Mackenzie Weegar, who, despite some solid defensive play, hasn't been able to ramp things up offensively. I agree. I did kind of expect more out of Weegar so far this season, but I think that he's been excellent defensively. And if Rasmus Andersson is now the leader for offensive defensemen, and I'm sure that takes some pressure off of Weegar as well. But again, this goes back to your coach not making adjustments, and he is clearly okay with coasting through and losing night after night, because it's one game at a time. But at the same time, you look at these, and that game last night should have been winnable. You don't have to go out there and score 4 goals, but just do something. Tyler Toffoli has been phenomenal this season, and you're telling me that he's the only one that could score on Georgiev last night? He's the only one? And it wasn't until like the last 5 minutes of the third period, when you had to score 4 goals to win? You couldn't do that? But enough is enough with that, because I could go on for another 20 minutes, and we are going to talk more about Darryl Sutter and his shortcomings coming up next. But before we do that, I do want to talk about our friends at BetOnline. This episode is brought to you by BetOnline, and you already know that they have you covered when it comes to sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from pro football to college bowl season to basketball and more. They have it all at betonline.net. If you love sports podcasts, take a break from the Locked On Network and head on over to BetOnline and find some more podcasts that you love. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. I appreciate you tuning in to Locked On Flames, and I greatly appreciate the love and support on Twitter as well. You can follow me at Jess Belmosto. I knew that there were quotes going around about Sutter's post-game press conference, but I did some digging and I found other quotes regarding Jakob Pellitier, and I wanted to dissect them and really read into this, because there's, I have 3 solid paragraphs here about Darryl Sutter's comments, and I can't do it. This is so frustrating, and I cannot even imagine being a player playing under him or being his boss and trying to get through to him. I like Jakob. I think that's a box, right? That's a Monge, Dylan, that sort of box, right? So that's what it is. I like him. You know what? It's on record. I've said it. He said it too. He didn't have a very good training camp. We played him in a couple of games, and that's why he deserved, and that's what he deserved. Or one game, I think. He didn't have a very good training camp. So then he went down and he didn't have a very good start. I went too. I watched and I pull for those young fellas. Timeout. Okay. Number one. Most people don't have a good training camp. Most people, it is like when you get back on the bike for the first time in a long time because you are, shaking that dust off. Your summers are not as busy and booked as your regular season. So if someone comes in and has like a sluggish start to their training camp, which most players do, it's not the end of the world. And that doesn't mean, 6 months later or 4 or 5 months later, they can't be looked at and reevaluated again. Because if I remember correctly, some of these players came into training camp and looked awful, especially in some of the preseason games. And I'm specifically remembering one where the Flames took 6 penalties. Okay? It was bad. And you know what? They were the Stockton Heat at the time, but they were playing. They had a very deep run into the AHL postseason and ended up losing in the Western Conference Finals to the Chicago Wolves, who won it all. So that is a very long postseason for them on top of a long season. And these kids are still young. Like, they are developing. I don't get it. I don't understand why you can't look back at what he has done in the AHL this season and say, hey, let's reevaluate this situation. Maybe I'm getting too ahead of myself here. But then his game picked up and took off, and he was a really important player there, and it's part of the development. You bring them up. Just like I tell these guys. You bring them up on trips, and then they have to watch how guys, before you can play in the NHL or before you can be successful in the NHL, you have to be around those guys and see what it's like. See, pick someone out. Prepare like him. Work like him in practice. And don't think you're him. I'll tell you who I think you're like, and we go from there. Okay, that's really cool that you want players to have mentors, but why don't you watch how they play in the AHL and have your scouts tell you, and why don't you pair them up with a mentor or something? The thing with Pelts, this is what gets me. This is what stopped me dead in my tracks, and I had to I stopped reading. I stopped walking. The thing with Pelts is always going to be his size. It's on record. It is on record. So as he gets a little stronger and gets a little more weight, then he's going to have a better opportunity. That's what happens. And he can still do that. He's only 21. Do comparisons to other players in our organization. They may be maxed out there. This boy is not. He's got energy for it and a passion and a work ethic for it. And he's a good kid. I don't care what you say. Connor Bedard is a 5'9". Johnny Gaudreau, 5'9". Brad Marchand is not 6 feet tall. He is absolutely 5'10", 5'11". Okay? And those are just a few players that come to my mind. Torrey Krug, although he's not forward. But you know what I mean? You do not have to be a certain size to see success. Yes. Should a player put on weight? Absolutely. But you know what? You beef up. Jack Studnicka beefed up, and he still wasn't getting solid playing time in the NHL with the Bruins, and then he ended up getting traded. And that's fine because he wasn't going to fit into the Bruins system. But do you really want to push this kid into a permanent development stage? Because you're not giving him an opportunity to grow here. You call him up. Yeah, okay, cool. He's scoping out the scenes. I'm sure he could do that by going to Flames games on nights where the Wranglers are off. I'm sure. And I'm sure that there are things that get talked about during, meetings and things like that, like with the AHL coaches and throughout the organization. And that has to be so discouraging. And I don't understand. Do you want this child? He's not a child, he's 21. Do you want this man to go get like leg lengthening surgery? Do you want him to like stress himself out to the point where he is overworking himself, trying to bulk up and perform at a level, and you're not even reevaluating him? You're not. You have not looked at how he plays in the NHL since training camp. You are just looking at his size. And then he makes a comment about how, responding to another question on the topic, Sutter spoke about Pelt's enthusiasm, noted the Flames are within the Western Conference playoff race. At the end of the day, I want him to get in. But we're not 10 up and we're not 10 out. So that's the way it works. No, it doesn't. And also, this was an article from Flames Nation by Ryan Pike. No, I'm sorry. At this point, you need something to light a fire under your offense. And that second line is a perfect place to do it because the expectation is for Huberdeau and Kadri to be about point-a-night players, a little bit more than a point-a-night players, and they cannot do that in the current situation that they are in. They are not set up for success, and please enlighten me. Just try to put him in the lineup. Why not try it against Columbus? You have nothing to lose except a bruised ego. That's it. And coming up next, we are going to talk more about Darryl Sutter and his pursuit to be general manager and how there is a rift between coaching and management here on Locked On Flames. But before we dive into that, I need to recharge with some Built Bar. And if you're looking for a delicious treat but don't want to overdo your calories, then you gotta try a Built Bar. What makes Built Bar so good? Well, for starters, they're covered in 100% real chocolate, and they taste like candy bars. They come in fantastic flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, coconut almond, and so many more. And now you don't need to wait around to get a box. For years, we've been talking and ordering Built Bars at Built.com, which you can still do, by the way. Now you can get them at your local Walmart or Sam's Club. Head on down today to get your Built Bars. Thank you all for hanging out with me here today at Locked On Flames, where we are in the thick of it right now. I hope that like you're listening to this while like you're on the treadmill or lifting weights and you're just getting pumped with me. Oh my gosh, that is when I listen to Big Mad True Crime, is when I am lifting weights, because I'm just like, yeah, let's go. Or when I'm on, when I have to force myself to do cardio that day because we need something to get me through it. And I hope that this podcast is that for you today. Alrighty. So I was at work today and saw a tweet from Justin from Sea of Red Central. And he tweeted that Frank Seravalli is also sensing a rift between coach and GM in Calgary. Says his read on Darryl, based on interviews, is what he does is ultimately what he wants is to ultimately be GM. I don't know why I stumbled over that so horribly, but I wish I had the guts, to just walk into my workplace and say, I'm going to run this place. Yes, you have a very impressive resume, but you are also sabotaging this team, and you did not draft well and did not have a good experience, a good tenure as the Flames general manager in the early to mid 2000s. So I think we need to avoid that situation at all costs. I understand that I am not running this team, but ownership they have a very different perception. And we talked about that earlier this week. It was Tuesday's episode with Nick Zararis, who will be joining us 2 times a week once the New York Giants are eliminated. So we'll have more in-depth discussions regarding things like this, of course. But ownership would walk across hot coals, lava for Darryl Sutter. They have made that so clear, and that's why they're doing what they're doing. That's why they're giving him a million chances. If another coach pulled this, they would have been fired. And Matthew Phillips and or Pellitier would be in the lineup. I'm telling you right now. It would absolutely be a different team. But I digress. There is a clear rift between Sutter and Treliving. Treliving, basically admitted it a few weeks ago when he was talking to the media, and he was like, yeah, I want the younger guys to play. It's only fair. And, ownership really isn't losing anything by promoting Sutter, especially because, it is Treliving's contract year. I really, it's not like they're firing Treliving and saying, okay, Sutter, here you go, here's your promotion. And they wouldn't be renewing a contract, and then they would just have to bring in another coach, and it would be Ryan Huska or someone within the organization, or it would be Brandon Sutter retiring from the NHL and coming on as a nepotism baby and coaching at the NHL level with no prior coaching experience. So you have to think that the wheels are turning in everyone's mind, and they have been for a while. I thought that Brad Treliving's job was secure. I really would have thought that Sutter at his old age would have been like, okay, I'm fine coaching, this is what I want to do. And people kind of joked about Sutter becoming general manager when he was rehired as a coach, and everyone was like, no, there's no way that happens. And now it's kind of, a real potential, a real reality here for us. And I have to wonder, is Darryl Sutter going to force ownership's hand and say, I'm going to sabotage this team and do directly the opposite of what Brad Treliving wants? And I'll coach my way. I'll coach the exact opposite of what he wants because you won't give me his job. And I'm sorry, but I didn't really know much about Darryl Sutter's tenure in Calgary as a general manager, but he ended up hiring 2 of his brothers, okay? 2 of his brothers. So please tell me that Brandon being hired as a coach is out of the picture, because it's not. I'm sorry, but he left Ontario to be in Calgary to be with his dad. He's played 1,000 AHL games. He is not a spring chicken anymore, So I really think that is a possible hire. And, if he has no problem hiring family, he has no problem with that. And I was reading the article that came out on NHL.com when Sutter quit, and I am just going to read a quick blurb here. Most of Sutter's first-round draft picks, however, did not pan out. His multiplayer trades early this year, have not had much impact. Sutter was unable to land a top center to complement captain and right wing Jerome Iginla. Do we want this? Is this something we want? If I'm Brad Treliving, I'm making a PowerPoint. I'm sitting and I'm securing my job. And I'm going to remind ownership who runs this house. Who put in the work this summer? Because it certainly will not be overlooked if and when those contract negotiations begin. I'm just saying, Darryl Sutter has nothing. Brad Treliving's tenure. Brad Treliving has been a fantastic general manager. There hasn't been a move that I've seen from him anyways where I'm like, Brad Treliving's a really good general manager, and you can't count this summer. You cannot count this summer because that was not up to him. So He works hard, he does what he needs to do, but at the end of the day, Darryl Sutter gets what Darryl Sutter wants, so we will have to see how that's gonna go, and, I look forward to talking more in depth about this with you. So thank you all for tuning in to Locked On Flames. As always, you can find the show wherever you get your podcasts, and of course, on YouTube at Locked On Flames, and, you can follow me on Twitter at Jess Belmosto, and the podcast is at LO_Flames pod. Until tomorrow, where we go over our winners and losers of the week and previewing the game against Tampa Bay, which maybe we just pretend doesn't happen.